Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information with some laughs, might I add. Hello everyone, welcome. It's been a while. I'm just gonna do a deck tech for the Wise Mothman. I call this deck the microwave because it's all about the new mechanic of radiation counters. I tried to maintain some identity of the deck, but I did end up changing quite a bit. If you are looking for upgrades to the deck, then you're in the right place. The total deck price comes out to be $150. If that interests you, stick around and I'm gonna talk about the choices that I made for the deck. We'll start off with the Planeswalkers. Ashiok the Dream Render. Since you are milling people's libraries with the radiation trigger, you want to deny them a resource because I guess utilization from the graveyard is becoming increasingly more popular, and if you are milling people, you're doing those types of players a favor, so you need to take that resource away, and Ashiok does that quite nicely with her native 1 ability. She turns tutoring off, so it's quite powerful against players who like to search their libraries a lot, which is the more competitive side of Magic, but you'd be surprised with how often even casual players search their libraries. This card is just a house, and that it turns off 2 really strong strategies.
So you get nothing!
Vraska, I know it's written in a different language, a made-up language at that. Let me just change the printing. I only have it on this printing because it's the cheaper one. If you notice, all my card recommendations are around $5 or less, and that's just to make it so it's more affordable to all of you to reasonably upgrade your decks. Let's just change the printing so I can actually read this, or that you could read this. It's 0 ability, lets you draw a card, and you proliferate. Proliferation is really powerful in this deck because you're putting counters on players, you're putting counters on your own permanents, and Vraska helps you ramp everything up, and that you get to add a counter of whatever kind on everything. So Proliferate in the right decks is very powerful. Its -2 ability lets you have target creature, you turn it into a treasure, and its -9 is you make a player have 9 poison counters. I pretty much am only playing this as a proliferation machine. I don't really care so much about the other 2 abilities, but if they came up where something needed to die or a player needed to die, then this is a fine option. Birds of Paradise, it's just a green staple. It's a mana dork that taps for all your colors. Whenever I'm in green and I'm playing multicolored, Birds is like an auto include for me, and for the reasonable price of $4.71, there's no reason why everybody should not be running it. Bloatfly Swarm. I like this card from Fallout because it may be an uncommon, but it's quite unique. It makes people not want to attack you because if damage to be dealt to Bloatfly, you remove that many counters, and each player gets a ride counter for each counter removed. Because you're doing a proliferation on the side, you could keep the counters on this for a reasonable amount of time. It just depends on how much you block with it and how many counters get removed, because it comes in with 5 for 4 mana. That's pretty good right out the gate. It will stay up off aggro and accelerate your game plan of radiating everybody. Brawn. I'm actually running a lot of incarnations in this deck because Wise Mothman makes you mill, and a lot of your like massive put radiation counters on players also put radiation counters on yourself. So milling a Brawn or one of your other incarnations are quite good. Like I'm running Wonder and I'm running Genesis as well. I like Genesis particularly a lot because it's a recovery option. Now for the +1/+1 kind of synergy, we got Champion of Lambhold. It makes it so your creatures can't be blocked by things of lesser power than your champion. I have a lot of ways to make your stuff unblockable in this deck. Since you're going to be sizing stuff up with Wise Mothman, if you didn't already know, whenever someone discards an online card, not only do they lose life, but you get to put a +1/+1 counter on up to X creatures or X number of non-land cards that get discarded. So ideally, that trigger happens on everyone's turn, so by the time it gets back to you, you have a much bigger board. If you're going to be sizing your creatures up just naturally, you might as well make them unblockable. Finish people off that way. Corpse Jack Menace, it basically doubles your counters.
Double fun!
Danny Pink. Because I can't feature this deck on Moto, 50% of the deck features cards from Fallout. I can't play it anyway, so I'm just throwing in everything from Universes Beyond that I can't play on Moto, just for you to enjoy. Danny Pink in particularly is good because whenever a counter gets put on a creature for the first time each turn, you draw a card. Since the likelihood of you putting counters on stuff happens likely on everybody's turns, Danny Pink lets you rack up a lot of draw triggers. Something I want to mention, this kind of functions like Fathom Mage. The only thing that's different is Fathom Mage, it forces you to dump counters onto itself, while this doesn't care where you put the counters. So I like that. You're not being forced to put all your eggs in one basket. Deathrite Shaman, again, another staple. If you're in green and black and you're in multiple colors, you should be running Deathrite Shaman, because people playing fetch lands, it's really common. Even like Evolving Wilds, I would say it happens all the time. Plus, if there are no fetch lands, Wise Mothman will probably end up forcing people to mill some lands. Your Deathrite Shaman should always be able to produce a mana at the minimum. Elves of Deep Shadow, I like this mana dork because you are adding black to your mana pool versus like, I don't know, Llanowar Elves. You already had access to green to play Llanowar, and then it gives you more green. This lets you diverge, so that's why Elves of Deep Shadow is a popular card. Evolution Sage, another proliferation engine. Whenever land enters, proliferate. Feral Ghoul, I like it in that it creates some kind of pressure when it's in play, and it also creates this weird space where people don't want to kill it either, so quite a fun card. Flux Channeler, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you proliferate. There are 34 non-creature spells in the deck, actually 36 counting the Planeswalkers, so Flux Channeler will trigger quite a bit. Same like Evolution Sage, there are 33 lands in your deck, so you should get a fair amount of triggers from that as well. We already talked about Genesis. It does a lot of work, considering that you could mill it and then fix your problem of losing pieces that you could use down the road. Gyre Sage seems like a no-brainer. You get mana based on the number of counters on it. On top of it having Evolve, you have plenty of ways to proliferate the counters and make this bigger and just generate a ton of mana. Herald of Streams makes all your creatures with +1/+1 counters unblockable. Ichor Rats, you have such a great proliferation package. I just shoehorned some poison in here as another win condition. This deck has a lot of win conditions for being a $150 budget deck. The poison theme, you have a mill theme, you have a chip damage like group slug theme with the radiation. That's why I like radiation so much in particular, is it's a resource that could kill your opponent two different ways.
Voodoo economics.
So that's why it's particularly powerful. Have an additional win condition that your board sizes up eventually to beat people to death. And then I have one more win condition in the form of Simic Ascendancy. If Simic Ascendancy has 20 more counters on it, you win the game. It seems pretty easy with how many counters you'll be racking up in this deck. So in total, you have at least 5 different options of winning. You don't see that very often, for this price anyways. Infesting Radroad, whenever it deals damage, they get that many rad counters, and then whenever someone mills an online card, you get to bring this back to your hand. It's pretty dope. Kami Whispering Hopes, another replacement effect to put an additional +1 counter on yourself, and it's like a Gyre Sage for any color. Just does a lot of work again. Mirelurk Queen, whenever someone mills a non-land card, you get to draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on the queen. It only triggers once a turn, but because of the radiation mechanic, ideally you'll be putting on a counter and drawing a card on everybody's turn. So it's a lot better than I think people give it credit, and it sizes up itself really quickly. Muldrotha, you have a lot of permanents in your library, and you have a nice even spread between enchantments, artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers, and lands. So you will probably get a lot of mileage out of Muldrotha. Rayhan, if something of yours dies, you get to transfer its counters to something else, so you don't lose the resource. It functions like an Ozolith, but Ozolith is like $20, so I couldn't throw it in the deck while following my budget restrictions. Screeching Scorch Beast. I like this card a lot when I was looking at the spoiler season. It attacks, puts 2 rad counters on each player, and then whenever a non-land card gets milled, you put that many zombies into play. This thing on its own, it's a bit of a bomb. Hopefully by the time it gets back to your turn, could potentially get 2 from every person, so that's at least 12 power by a full revolution of the table. Maybe they can't deal with it, and then Mothman helps size up your stuff as well. Sir Conrad, you're going to be making people mill stuff, so why not deal an additional damage on top of the radiation life loss? Seems pretty good in this deck. Throwing Bird, just a cheap body. Same with Vexing Radgull. I like Vexing Ragdoll when I was looking at the previews a lot as well, because in the event that someone already has rad counters, you could proliferate instead. So say you attack with Mothman, you already preemptively put the counters on with Mothman. Vexing Ragdoll will happen and put an additional of any counter on all your permanents. Or you could just attack someone who already has radiation and get that proliferation. Of these like creatures, I'd say Thrumming Bird's the weakest because you need something in play with counters to enable Thrumming Bird. That's the only drawback of Thrumming Bird, while Vexing Ragdoll is just significantly better because it's always going to be doing something no matter what. Blinding Constrictor, another counter enabler. And then Wonder, it's an incarnation that gives all your stuff flying should it be in your graveyard. More proliferation and draw stuff. Let's see. Here's another card advantage and poison counter theme. When I build decks, I have like an allotted amount of slots where I'm trying to accomplish a certain threshold of stuff. So like I want a certain amount of card advantage. I want a certain amount of removal, ramp, whatever. If I can make the card more dense by adding synergy to it, I love doing it. So this is, again, a card advantage and a synergy piece. Versus Harmonize is not so much. It's just a card advantage slot, which is why I don't want to talk about it too terribly much. Nuclear Fallout. I love this card. And it's if you have enough mana to sink into this, not only does it act as a board wipe, but it will put on a ton of rad counters. It could be a win condition.
We are going to die!
Depending on how late in the game it is. But it's a nice finisher that functions both like an Sanguinate and Black Sun Zenith. I particularly like -X more than destruction spells because it gets around things like Heroic Intervention and Boros Charm. Meta-wise, I try to avoid those cards because of stuff like this and Toxic Deluge, because they always get you anyways. I didn't include the new mutant card that protects your board, and I didn't include Inspiring Call because they are mana inefficient. They cost 3 mana to protect your board, versus if you just played counter magic, you could protect your board for 2 or less mana. So I made room for stuff like Offer You Can't Refuse, Arcane Denial, what have you. You want to be able to maximize your turn. You're going to be playing at sorcerer speed most of the game. You need to trim down your interaction spells to be as cheap as possible so you could maximize the revolution of the turn. Terra Sunder is another meta piece. It exiles an artifact or enchantment, so it deals with the One Ring effectively. And then should there not be any artifacts or enchantments worth you exiling, you could pay 2 more and exile any permanent. So I like the flexibility of this card. Conduit of Worlds, if you ever become Hellbent, you could always just cast something from your graveyard and hopefully start rebuilding something from there. Everything else is just mana rocks. I guess some flavor is Midnight Clock, Astral Cornucopia, and Everflowing Chalice because your proliferation package will help scale those rocks up. Inexorable Tide. I'm excited about this card because pre-reprint, this card was expensive. I couldn't feature it on my channel. Now it's back to what it used to be at $2.50. It's really strong because whenever you cast any spell, you proliferate. I could play Ichor Moon Gauntlet, but I'm not playing a lot of Planeswalkers that take advantage of the whole card. So I didn't include it, and it was just slightly out of budget anyways, so I just let it go. Inexorable Tide, it's better because it triggers on any spell that you cast. If you have a poison counter on everybody, by the time this hits the table, they basically get a turn to breathing, and then the next time you untap, you could probably kill people with this in play. And I made some extensive changes to the mana base. There is no reason for folks to be playing tap lands in this day and age because there are so many good untapped lands that fix your mana. The only time I made that exception is if it taps for all 3 colors. So like I kept Evolving Wilds and I kept Terramorphic and I added the new Escape Tunnels, and I've died one too many times from not having access to an untapped land source. So I highly recommend, if you're going to be building budget mana bases, you look at these types of lands. So like the Pathways, Check lands, and Pain lands, and the OG filter lands. I'm genuinely surprised by these. I was expecting them to be a little more expensive because they finished the cycle with this set. We're unpopular because you have to invest mana into it to make this mana. I don't mind so much. Like if you just invest green or blue into this land, you just get it right back. No big deal. From what I read online on Reddit is people hate these lands, and I'm not entirely sure why. I actually find them to be a little bit better than the lands from the Shadowmoor block because you have to pay specific pips to get the filtration, but the filtration's better on those lands, so it's like a give or take. This, it could be anything, and that's why I particularly find him useful. I guess I'm just genuinely surprised that they already fallen to like less than $1. I feel like they're a lot better than what the monetary value reflects. So that's my own personal feelings on the matter. I managed to hit 33 land count without anything being tapped except for things that tap for 3 or more colors, and that only represents 4 or 5 lands in my mana base. That's a pretty good deal. I think in total I invested $45 in just my mana base. From what I've been playtesting with this is I don't have any issues coming up with my colors. So if you do from the pre-con, highly recommend you swap out all the crappy tap lands and you do what I did over here. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe. If you stuck around this long, you clearly like something that I had to say about the deck. It's been a while since I've been here, so for my subscribers that stuck around and enjoy my content, thank you. I do care about you guys a lot. I just had some life things I had to take care of. I'm a full-time student, so I took like 2.5 weeks off covering both the spoiler seasons for Fallout and Markov Manor last month. So that means I had to make up 2 weeks of schoolwork.
Academics keep us pretty busy.
And that's why I haven't made as much content as I normally do. But I'm going to be releasing at least 3 deck techs over the weekend. There's obviously Mothman. I think the next one is going to be Mr. House. And then after that, 3 Dog. I hope you all enjoyed. Everyone take care now. Bye.